Meanwhile, heavy fighting continues across the Gaza Strip. Israel's army says it has launched 300 airstrikes in the past 24 hours alone.
It was supposed to be the first day of a pause in fighting, but as details of a delay emerged, Israel pounded Gaza with more airstrikes. The attacks hit residential areas across the territory, including this neighborhood east of Khan Yunis in the south. Rescuers trying to pull people from under the debris say 4 houses were destroyed.
There are families here, civilians, children. We have pulled dead women, dead men and families from under the rubble. I think there are still around 20 people under the rubble.
The Israeli military published this video of its latest strikes on Gaza. It says Hamas is deliberately hiding its infrastructure in residential areas. In another video released on Thursday, an army spokesperson claims soldiers have found more evidence of that, highlighting what he says is an entrance to a network of tunnels.
And then you can see the tunnel shot. It was
one direction goes to the Shifa hospital, other directions go to different places, different location, where the terrorists can move using the safe haven, the human shield of the hospital, the human shield of those regular houses, providing them shelter.
As more and more Palestinian civilians are killed or wounded inside Gaza, many are hoping to see a respite in fighting, but say it won't end their suffering.
The 4-day pause is simply not enough. We want something long-term. We want stability. We can't be in a state of rushing away with our belongings, leaving our homes and constantly running.
But that is unlikely to happen, as Israel's chief of staff visiting the troops in Gaza makes very clear.
We are not ending the war. We will continue until we are victorious, going forward and continuing in other Hamas areas.
Meaning many more civilians could be caught in the crossfire.
As for the truce between Israel and Hamas, well, it's to begin Friday morning, according to Qatar, a country heavily involved in making it come about. Qatar said humanitarian aid would then start flowing into Gaza. The first batch of civilian hostages will be released later Friday afternoon, though it's still unclear when and how many Palestinians will be released from Israeli jails. Qatar's foreign ministry spokesperson said all parties were working to ensure that the hostages are released safely.
They will be, as I said, handed over to the Red Cross, and I won't get into the details of how they are dealt with after that, but the idea is to make the transfer as safe as possible for all parties. We have to remember this is a war zone, and we need to make sure, and this is why the discussions yesterday went until early this morning, to make sure that the executive plan for the implementation of this agreement troubleshoots any possible and safeguards against any possible problems within the release itself.
We can now speak to Mark Regev. He's Israel's former ambassador to the UK and currently acts as an advisor to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Mr. Regev, welcome to the day. Qatar has announced that 13 hostages will be released tomorrow. Who decides who gets to leave and who gets left behind?
So we've received a list of the 13 names that are supposed to be released tomorrow. Obviously, until they're here, until they're back on Israeli soil, we are, of course, eager to see their state. And until, as President Biden said, until the deal is done, it's not done. So we're going to put off comment about giving the names and so forth until they're back on Israeli soil.
But who it's Hamas deciding who they free?
No, there was a process where we've prioritized at the beginning children. You know that out of Hamas's captives, out of the people they abducted, there are 32 children, including a baby who was kidnapped at the age of 9 months. Before the baby could walk or talk, it was kidnapped by Hamas. And I think that just shows who we're up against here and why it is so difficult and why I don't want to prejudge. We hope we see the release tomorrow. We're waiting to see how it develops.
This deal has been called immoral and painful by members of Benjamin Netanyahu's cabinet. Are the bereaved families in Israel right in accusing the government of not putting the hostages first?
No, the release of the hostages is one of our major objectives in this operation, and we don't believe
But it's not the first objective.
that we would have been. No, but let me be clear. We don't see a contradiction between the different objectives. Why? Because we don't believe Hamas would be releasing a single hostage if it wasn't for the military pressure they're under. The IDF has been hitting Hamas hard, been destroying its military infrastructure, eliminating its command. And in so doing, Hamas is motivated for the timeout, for the pause that the release of the hostage gives them. And so actually, we see the military pressure as facilitating the release of the hostages. Hamas is not releasing these people because they've suddenly become humanitarians. That's obvious.
Now, a group of Hamas victims petitioned the Israeli High Court to stop the hostage deal, considering that some of the masterminds of the October 7th attack were released in the deal that saw Gilad Shalit freed in 2011. What does the government intend to do to stop that from happening again?
Once again, releasing people who've been convicted of violent extremism, of involvement in terrorism, is never an easy decision. But I think we've weighed up the risks, and the most important thing we believe is we've got a chance to save people's lives, because we don't people, especially the young children, to persevere there underneath some underground bunker held by Hamas. If we can get people out, we've prioritized that now. But this is a humanitarian pause. When the release of the hostages is over, of course, the campaign against Hamas will continue until we have destroyed Hamas's military machine and eliminated its control of Gaza.
How can you be sure that the people that are being released in the coming days are not going to go then and attack Israel in the future?
So we can't be 100% sure ever. I said before, it's just a matter of managing risk and in a bad situation, and it's a difficult situation, I admit it, of making a decision between options and to find what is the best option. And we believe getting our people home has to have a high priority. You said before in one of your questions, there have been accusations that the Israeli government isn't prioritizing the release of hostages. That's simply not true, as this shows.
Early on in the war, IDF spokesperson Daniel Hagari said the focus was on destruction, not accuracy, and we have seen this play out over the past month and a half. Now the World Food Programme warns that over 2 million people, pretty much all Gazans, face the immediate possibility of starvation. How does that help Israel achieve its goal of defeating Hamas?
So our goal is to target the Hamas military machine, and to do everything we can to safeguard Gaza's civilians. And there is no limitation whatsoever on food and medicine and water entering the Gaza Strip.
That is not true.
Why do you say that? There are over 100 trucks now entering every day through the Rafah crossing.
And still people are going hungry. Dangerously so.
Maybe there's once again, over 100 trucks are entering the crossing every day. We're hopeful that we can get up to 150 soon, after that to 200 trucks. We don't see the civilian population of Gaza as our enemy. On the contrary, in many ways, they're also victims of this terrible Hamas regime that has been in power in Gaza for 16 years. And what has it brought the people of Gaza? It's brought them pain, suffering, and impoverishment.
Yeah, suffering that a lot of people right now are arguing is being exacerbated by the blockade that was intensified on October 7th. But let's move on, because
Can I answer that? Can I answer that? Please allow me to answer that. Because I don't think there's a situation of war ever in the history, and you will tell me if I'm wrong, but they declared war on us on October 7th, and yes, they want the crossings to be open and for trade to continue and so forth. That's illogical. Tell me another example of a war between two countries, and at the same time you supply them with everything is business as usual. That's not a logical assumption.
Functioning humanitarian corridors and safe zones would be an option.
But that we do. But that we do. To be fair, we do that.
Well, the UN doubts that your safe zones are really safe for people to stay, and also unrealistic for all the people who are right now in need of shelter and housing and attention. That those zones are simply too small. But let's move on, because there's lots I want to talk to you about.
But if you raise something, surely I should be allowed to answer. If you raise an accusation, please allow me to answer. I think it's fair.
Go ahead.
The UN has called for a humanitarian ceasefire to end all the fighting, full stop. And that leaves Hamas in power. And the UN is wrong on that issue. The Secretary General is simply wrong, because to call for a ceasefire that leaves Hamas in power means that we're going to have more October 7th. Hamas has said, their own leaders have said, after the October 7th massacre of the Israeli civilian population, they have said, given the opportunity, they would do it again and again and again.
All right.
That means the butchering of our people. That means the rape of Israeli women. I'm just saying, to call the UN's position has been wrong.
But let me ask you this. Even if you manage to eradicate Hamas infrastructure in Gaza, their ideas, their international backers, and other militant groups wishing to wipe Israel off the map will prevail. So what is the end game here?
I don't agree with the assumption in your question. I apologize, but I don't think it's true. You defeated, the West defeated ISIS in Syria and Iraq, and in both countries, they were better off without ISIS. And in the same way, Gaza will be better off without Hamas rule. It'll be better for the people of Israel, who won't have to live in fear of terrorists crossing the border and butchering their people in the middle of the night. But the people of Gaza will have a regime. It won't be a terrorist, extremist, crazy regime like Hamas's.
Who will it be?
And instead, they'll have a government that looks after their own interests, a Palestinian government that actually cares about the well-being of the people of Gaza, because it's clear Hamas has no priority whatsoever to the well-being of people of Gaza. Their record in government shows it. I'm sure that when this is over, and the people of Gaza can speak freely, because today they live under a terrible dictatorial regime, they can't speak freely. But once this regime is destroyed, you will hear from Gaza an outpouring of pent-up anger against Hamas for starting this war and creating all this destruction.
Well, let's talk about the day after then, and who will be able to shape Gaza, because the Israeli Prime Minister, your boss, Netanyahu, has said that Israel will maintain security control of the Strip for an indefinite period. The U.S. State Department has been very clear, saying that Gaza is Palestinian land and will remain Palestinian land. Will the Palestinian people get a say in it?
So Israel says clearly, we don't want to reoccupy Gaza. We don't want to rule the people of Gaza. On the contrary, we want to see Palestinians rule Gaza. But what we say, we have two principles, which I think the international community can agree to. One, that Gaza needs to be demilitarized, and the second, that Gaza needs to be de-radicalized. We want to see a government in Gaza that is a government that actually deals with the problems of the people in Gaza: employment, social services, education, and so forth. Now, that's clearly not happening under Hamas. The people of Gaza deserve better. You are correct when you say that for the foreseeable future, Israel has to have overriding security control of Gaza. But that doesn't necessarily mean Israeli military occupation. We could be on the outside, on the envelope of Gaza, and go in when we need to go in to deal with an emerging terrorist threat. We didn't go through all this just to see terrorists gain control again in Gaza, and we can't take our eye off the ball. We saw what happened on October 7th. We have a responsibility to our own people to protect them. But given we have no trouble with a peaceful government in Gaza, which is run by Palestinians for Palestinians.
Yeah, allow me one more question, because we're running out of time. But now that you talk about kind of dropping the ball, many Israelis blame one man for what happened on October 7th, and that is Benjamin Netanyahu. Over 70% of Israelis right now want him gone. Why should he stay in the post and shape the future of Israel and the Palestinian territories?
So, as you know, since the October 7th massacre of our people, Israelis have become unified around the goal to defeat Hamas. And actually, from a coalition point of view, and you've got a coalition government in Germany too, it has widened. A major party that was in opposition moved in to support the government for the duration of the conflict and is in support of the goals. And I think you've seen the Israeli people, who have been polarized politically over the last few months, move together, united as never before. 3 goals. 1, destroy Hamas's military machine. 2, get our hostages home. And 3, have a new situation in Gaza where there is no longer a terrorist enclave on our southern border that threatens the lives of our people.
That was Mark Regev, advisor to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Thanks for your time.
Thank you for having me.
And we can go straight to Ariel Bernstein. He's a former Israeli soldier who fought in the Gaza war of 2014. He's now an activist against Israel's occupation of the Palestinian territories, with the NGO Breaking the Silence. The veterans group collects anonymous testimonies of alleged abuses by Israel's military and has been heavily criticized by the Netanyahu government. Good to see you, Mr. Bernstein. Now, you recently wrote in The Guardian, a military response cannot on its own bring security. In your opinion, what should be the government's response to the threat posed by Hamas?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I want to say that to answer your question, we need to speak about how we got to this point. Once we're deep into a completely dangerous and violent escalation that we're seeing, it's quite difficult for me to say exactly how to get out of it. But what I know is that this could have been prevented. This isn't something that just came out of nowhere. We've seen this coming, so it's not coming as a surprise. And obviously, after what Hamas did to our people, the evil and violent massacre of innocent people, I believe we do have a right to have a response. But a military response is what we're saying is that a military response on it by itself will not solve the core issues of this conflict.
As someone who fought in Gaza yourself, what goes through your mind when you see images of IDF soldiers fighting house to house in the middle of a dense civilian population?
Yeah, so every time there is what we call in Israel a round, which is basically an escalation of violence between us and the Gaza Strip and the population and the Hamas, I'm taken back right away to my experience crossing that fence. 9 years ago, I crossed that fence with my unit, Sayeret Nachal, with deep commitment in my heart to the people and the citizens of Israel and to the state of Israel. And first of all, for my friends from the unit. And it was probably one of the most intense and difficult experiences of my life, and it follows me today. And every time I see escalation in that area, it takes me back to those days where I experienced the most devastating destruction that I've seen. And what war is ugly, it's difficult. But what I believed is that we're going to give a blow to Hamas that is going to limit them and hurt them for the future. And then I believe that the state that sent me there, the state of Israel, has the responsibility, and that they would be responsible enough to do anything possible to prevent from us getting to another round of war.
Oh, it looks like we lost him there. That was Ariel Bernstein, Israeli veteran and anti-occupation activist. Thank you, if you can still hear us.